Unusually warm for this week. I guess if I understand things correctly, thank you, we've been breaking some records this week in terms of how warm it's been. Thank you. All right, I got some cool things to tell you, but I need to find a towel. Hold on. All right, first off, thanks for being here. I'm excited to see you. I'm excited to be able to share some cool things with you and talk you through one of the most difficult chapters to read in the Bible. So if you read through that and you don't know how to pronounce the names, nobody else does either. So you're in really good company. But before we get there, gosh, we've had so many cool things happen this week. And we've got some fun things on the horizon that I want to tell you about. The administrative team met last night, and we had a really long meeting where we talked about all the things. Few of the exciting things that are coming are we're going to try to have some fellowship dinners a little bit more often. We don't know for sure how often. We talked about doing it once a month, every other month, kind of like the taco dinner and spaghetti dinner we did after church here recently. So we decided collectively that we would kind of put something out to the congregation and see if there's anybody who is interested in being a part of a group to plan those things. And if there is, we'll pull that group together. I think Debbie Schultz is going to be the staff person who heads that up. She's done a lot of work to plan those meals for us over the last few months. And so if that's you, if you like to be a part of those things, just let us know. We'll put it out to the congregation over the course of the next few weeks too. But I think it'll be a good time, a good opportunity to have some fellowship, which a lot of us have been missing throughout the course of the last 2 years when it was so hard to get together. So that's coming. We're also going to be planning Southern Hills Family Fun Day sometime this summer. I think we haven't quite set a date for that yet. We wanted to put some feelers out and find out who is going to be gone, when, and where. But sometime this summer, we're going to have a Family Fun Day where we're going to take a look at, tearing all this down, putting the basketball goals down. Somebody said they want to play pickleball. We'll do hamburgers and hot dogs and have some water games outside and just have a good time on a Sunday afternoon sometime. So I'll put more of that out once the date has been decided upon, but I'm looking forward to doing that too. And then the outreach ministries that we have been working on, which are, I think, single-handedly some of the best things that we do here, have been growing, and we've got some developments there that I'm really excited about. One of them is that the Homeless Outreach Mobile Ministry met a couple of weeks ago to talk about forming its own 501c3, which is a nonprofit corporation designation. Churches also are sort of nonprofits. A lot of churches are 501c3s. The United Methodist Church as a whole is. We have a ruling from the IRS that covers how we interact with the government. But religious nonprofits don't often have access to the same grant funding that secular nonprofits do. So a number of churches have formed another nonprofit for their outreach ministries in order to be able to comply with some of the regulations that are required for that. For instance, a lot of us who participate in the homeless outreach ministry just had to take some training through, I believe it was DHS, that kind of says, if you're going to use funding from DHS, then you can't proselytize as a part of the outreach work that you're doing with what you receive. So grant funding is available through that as well. So the evolution of that is that group met, decided, we would really be interested in forming a 501c3 that covers our outreach ministries, the Homeless Outreach Mobile Ministry, and then eventually also probably the human trafficking outreach that we're taking a look at. The admin team talked about that last night, and they were like, yeah, this is a great idea. Not only does it provide greater access to funding, it also transitions any liability away from the church, which is a good thing too. So the next step for that is that the group that met, the Homeless Outreach Mobile Ministry that met to talk about this, has formed kind of a transitional board that's going to focus on writing some bylaws and getting the filings done. But once we get through that process, that whole thing is going to come before the meeting of the members, the next one we have in July, I hope. We're going to answer all the questions, because predictably, there have been a lot of them. Is this going to be completely separate from the church? No, it's something the church is forming. But we'll answer all the questions, and then the members will vote on that, and we'll move forward accordingly. So I'm kind of excited about that because if you serve in those ministries, then you well know that we have kind of reached our bandwidth for being able to provide what we provide to the people we provide it to. We have a number of great volunteers, but we have really run out of storage space, funding for food, that kind of thing. And so finding more funding would be a huge deal. This last week, those of y'all who are out there, Ann, what was it, like 138 or not? You weren't there. You were not there? 138? Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, then that's kind of I think the most we've ever done is 167 or so that I remember. And that's high for us. It's an amazing thing when God does this loaves and fishes thing out there with us where we somehow manage to get food to people even when they show up late. But anyway, the more funding, the better. I'm excited about that. But there also have been some other neat things that have happened. I had 3 amazing ladies contact me and say, hey, we happened to stop into Exchange Avenue Baptist Church and we met the most amazing human. Her name is Felicia. She's trying to coordinate a bunch of things like this, homeless outreach. She was telling us that day because I brought up the human trafficking outreach when we all went to meet with her. They're like, you got to come meet with her. And so we did on Tuesday. And when I brought up the human trafficking outreach, found out that she has three women, I believe, who had been victims of that, who are staying with her in her house. She talked to us about all the places that all the people are being trafficked out of and everything she's trying to do. She's like a connector. So she knows kind of everybody in the area. But Exchange Avenue Baptist used to be huge. They have about as many people as we do now on a Sunday morning, and they have all the space. So we're going to do a couple of things. They've offered us some storage space, which we're going to explore in greater detail. We're going to continue to meet with Felicia and figure out how we can partner together down in the Stockyard City area. Debbie and I are going out, not this Tuesday because Debbie's son is graduating, but the following Tuesday, to take a look at this space. They have this whole unused child care center space that was formerly used that they think can be licensed, the funds from which can go into their outreach ministry that they want to partner with us in. And so super excited about this. I'm going to go talk to her about that and see what that leads to because she knows all the people. She mentioned that there is a church that has a group of 80 men who have been looking for a place to serve. So I'm going to get that contact information and see if they have an interest in serving on some other days out at Stockyard City so we can get more people fed more reliably, more frequently. So I think God's doing some really cool things there, making some connections through people who just have the wherewithal to stop in a place and talk to somebody and then pull me aside and say, Matt, you got to meet this person. And I'm so glad that we did. That led to a couple of other cool things. One was when you go out there, I was talking to Katie about this. If you come out, you need to come out sometime. If you can ever work it out, even just come out and see it. It has changed so much in the last year, 2 years, this year really. But when we go out there, and this is what I was telling Kate about, the questions that come up are not questions that you could ever anticipate. You can anticipate that people need clothing and sundry items and food, but the other things that come up, you just could never anticipate. I was out there, it was probably, 3 weeks ago, that somebody came up and said, hey, there's a man here, Native American, turns out he was a full-blooded Choctaw guy, who says he was a United Methodist minister and has retirement funding he can't figure out how to get. And, my first thought is, probably not, but okay, I'm going to go check this out. So every time, one of my favorite things about being out there is that it literally takes 15 to 45 seconds between the time I talk to the last person and the time that somebody else comes up and says, hey, this person just mentioned this, you need to go talk to them. And so I just get to go talk to them. It's the best part of my week. So I go over and talk to him, say, hey, I'm Matt, I'm a United Methodist minister, tell him all the things. And he's like, I was served in the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, which is the Methodist conference for indigenous people here. David Wilson leads that. He is a good friend of mine. He's the only reason I got to work out at First Americans Museum. He's a great guy. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's neat. So tell me what's going on, And he's like, well, I've had this, apparently this pension fund from Westpath, which I needed to hear because that is exactly who our retirement's through. It's like since 1995. And they've told me I get what did he say? something like a $23,000 lump sum distribution and then an annuity after that. But he's like, I haven't been able to figure out how to fill out the forms. And so he pulls the forms out, and they are the actual forms, right? And I'm looking at this because nobody else on earth knows how to fill these forms out either. It's like reading the chapter we read today. Nobody can figure that stuff out. And so I called David, and then I called Gary, who is our benefits person at the conference. And Gary's like, yeah, I'd love to talk to him. Have him come in sometime. I'm like, okay, can we make you an appointment? We made him an appointment. And it was like a week later. So he went in on a Wednesday, went back in on a Friday, saw him Tuesday. And he's got this huge smile on his face, right? He wears a mask, and he walks with a stick, like a walking stick, but he always pulls his mask down just enough for me to be able to see him smile. So he's got this huge smile on his face, right? And they're like, so how did it go? And he's like, I got it. We got it done. And he's like, I'm just waiting for, he said the distribution starts, get this, in June. And the lump sum thing, he's waiting to hit his account right now. Had $27 in his bank account that he's been trying to make last for the last something like 30 or 45 days. That to Wanda. I met Wanda, who had just been evicted from her home and was staying, I think from what she was saying, and I think she's at City Rescue from the way she was describing it. And she, predictably was upset, had to walk away from everything she had, was in a bad circumstance. And that just so happens to be the day that we're going to go see Felicia. And when one of y'all said maybe she has some housing options, and I'm like, okay, cool. So I bring that up to Felicia. She's like, yeah, connect her with me. So I had already given her my phone number. I keep getting asked for cards. I haven't had cards in a minute. So Michelle's getting cards because I've been writing down my cell phone number on random pieces of paper that Dan finds every time I'm out there. So I give her my phone number. I'm like, text me later. She does. She texts me later, and after I get done with Felicia, I'm like, hey, I think Felicia has some ways to connect you with housing. So here's her number. Go ahead and contact her. She's like, is it okay for me to contact her now? I'm like, yeah, contact her now. Felicia messages me. It was either late last night or early this morning. She's like, we got her taken care of. She's got a place to stay. We're good to go. I or anybody else who serves out there could literally give you 100 of those stories over and over and over again. When we say that God is doing amazing things through that ministry, through the people who prepare food here faithfully every single week, that go out to our shut-ins, that go out to the homeless outreach, and now what God is going to get ready to do through the trafficking thing. We've got a whole idea about how to do that. We're going to work together with Felicia to see about working that out too. But I'm excited about where that could go. God really is doing some stuff through a congregation that has, like so many others, struggled to stay vibrant through the pandemic. I sat and ate lunch with the bishop on Monday, randomly, and he was telling me, I was asking about churches that do homeless trafficking, if he knew of any. He said, yeah, there's one in Abilene. And I was like, okay, how big are they? And he's like, well, they're about 100 people. I was like, okay, okay, that's fine. I was like, is that, how are they doing post-pandemic? And he said, that's about half of what they had before the pandemic. And I said, well, Bishop, he's in charge of 2 conferences now. So many churches closed that they had to combine annual conferences. So he's now responsible for North Texas and all of Oklahoma. And so I was like, and with all the churches you see, what's normal for them? Because I've been reading a lot and hearing a lot. And he's like, honestly, Matt, if you're at half of what you had before the pandemic, you're doing pretty good. Most of our churches, he said, are about a third. Somewhere between a third and a half of their people are back in church after the pandemic. There have been a lot of changes there, and so staying vibrant has been difficult. I'll have an update for you about the split of the Methodist Church because there's a lot being filtered about that. I'll tell the entire congregation what I know at the next members meeting, but I was talking with the bishop about that on Tuesday. This is why you should come to Bible study. You get all the news. And I asked him about that because they pushed General Conference off a couple of years, and when they did that, the Global Methodist Church, which is the traditionalist side of the group that was going to break away, they went ahead and launched their denomination on May 1st. And some churches have started leaving, though not many. I asked the bishop about that, and he said, yeah, I don't think that we're going to end up having a vote about splitting. Since this group already launched, there is a process for churches to leave if they want to leave. So he said, churches that want to, we're going to let go through that process. Everybody else is going to remain United Methodist. He said that's not written in stone. That's just what he thinks is going to happen most likely. And I said, again, what are you finding? Because my experience with Methodist churches that I'm familiar with is that a lot of churches are just kind of split on where they are with that whole split thing. And he said, yeah, most churches are. He said, but frankly, he said the churches that have not already initiated the process to leave, he said most of them are going to be leaning toward what we would call being inclusive. And so I would expect that to be a continuation of the direction that the church is going to go. But I'll have more information about that by the time we have our next members meeting in July, and I'll share with you everything I know. Which is a lot, I guess, right now. I didn't know I knew that much. So we've got some cool stuff happening. And I say that a lot because I need to, I'm going to continue to ask us to invite people. I've always thought and heard that the best way for a church to grow is for its members to ask people to be a part of things. But we have to be we've got to be interested in what we're doing in order to want to naturally do that. Most of us are going to say, I don't know who I would invite, right? I've made it a goal to try to find a way to invite people to connect with us 2 to 3 times a week. And so far, I'm sticking to that. Somebody once told me that 6 no's are halfway to a yes, right? The thing is that, for instance, I think we do some worship really well here at Southern Hills. Actually, the Foundry service that we have, as far as any service that I've ever been a part of putting together, I'm probably more proud of that than any other service. I really enjoy both of our services. That one is really coming together in a pretty cool way. And they're both growing just a little bit at a time, right? But while I love the worship, and I absolutely love Thursday morning is also one of my favorite days of the week, we're growing organically through our outreach. People are coming into the outreach slowly, albeit, but who don't have another connection with our church other than that somebody said, we're doing this, you ought to come, and they do. And they'll come and they'll say, I go to another church, is it okay for me to be here? Yes, it's okay for you to be here. And whether you're showing up on Sunday morning or showing up on Tuesday at lunch, you're part of what we're doing. Whether you took membership vows or didn't take membership vows, you're part of us once you start doing that. So I'm going to be continuing to ask us to go find people who share that kind of passion, who feel that same kind of pull on their heart and spirit to be a part of what God is doing that way. Go find them and bring them and help them to plug into what we're doing. Some of them will eventually show up and worship, and that'll be cool. The others of them we'll hang out with on Tuesdays or whatever other days we do those things and make some new friends and give people who they may be happy in the church they're in, but they don't have a way to serve in that congregation in a way that fits their heart for what God is doing. Well, let's give them that. Let's help them with that. So you're going to hear me. I'm going to be a broken record that way. Just expect that to come because we do need to grow our congregation some. All right, I told you, now I'm going to get started with this really hard chapter. But while I do that, I told you a while back that the Hebrew Bible looks very different than ours. So I brought one for you to look at. I'm going to pass it around. When you look at it, you need to know that you got to go through this backwards, okay? So it starts, the way that you would normally think of a book, you got to turn it over. The back side is the front, okay? And when you open it, you read back to front, and instead of reading left to right, let me get one, you read right to left, all right? So I've also told you that this language was essentially lost and reconstituted, and that in its original form, you only have consonants. So you're going to see those consonants, you'll see it in here, they're depicted as drawings, right? Drawings that represent consonant sounds. Then you're going to see a series of dots or lines above or below. Above or below the consonant, right? Those dots and lines represent vowel sounds that scholars put back in to make the word make sense. So in its original form, those dots and lines don't exist because ancient Hebrew is only written in consonants. So I'll start this here. You guys can feel free to look at it, pass it around. If you've been to a study of mine before, you've probably seen it already. I'll bring the Greek one sometime. Probably bring the Cherokee one someday. I should have brought that today because I'm going to talk about that some. All right, let's do this. The scriptures are holy, and before we consider them, we should pray. Let's do that together. Gracious and giving God, we're thankful for what you're doing in us and what you're doing through us. We're thankful for who we have been, where we have come from, and what you have brought us through. And we're thankful for who we are and for where we are and for what we are becoming because of your grace and love and mercy. And we're also grateful and excited about what the horizon looks like. Because as we look forward, we are stepping into ministries that we had no idea we would be doing a half a decade ago. We're touching lives and making friends that we never would have met or known if you hadn't drawn us together in this place in this way. We pray for our friends that are not here, wherever they are. Ask that your Holy Spirit would provide for them as you are and as you do, and we also ask that you would open our hearts and our minds and our spirits so that we would better know you as a result of our time together today. Amen. All right, Genesis 14. This is a hard chapter to read because there are a lot of names in this chapter that are very difficult to pronounce. There's a couple of things that come out of it. One is here that you get an introduction to the biblical concept of redemption. And that is important because that concept of redemption is integral to understanding salvation, the salvific process, and God's role in the act of salvation. So we're going to see that, and we're going to see how that plays itself out in the ancient Hebraic clan structure, right? So there's a clan system here, an ancient Arabic clan system as a result of how the Hebrew people form themselves. We're going to see the name Hebrew show up in this passage. The only time that Abram is referred to as a Hebrew, though the name Hebrew will continue to recur in the Old Testament. But it's a clan structure. It is patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal, right? So the oldest living male is in charge, patriarchal. Patrilineal, the family lives around the oldest living male. That's patrilocal. Patrilineal is descendancy is determined through the oldest living male. So if you're going to inherit, the inheritance comes through the male line, not through the female line, right? So patriarchal, male's in charge. Patrilineal, the descendancy is determined through the male line. Patrilocal means you live together with the oldest living male in the oldest living male's dwelling. So, for instance, in a marriage, the married couple is going to go with the patriarch side of the family. I told you I was going to talk about Cherokee stuff. You're like, I thought that's how ancient antiquity kind of worked. Cherokee Nation is oligarchical and matrilineal and patrilocal. So descendancy is determined traditionally through the female line, but you would go live with the male family. However, in the household is not oligarchical, the household is matriarchal. The woman is in charge of the household and actually could traditionally divorce the person that she was married to by setting all of their belongings outside of the home. That was if you came back and your belongings were outside of the home, you're divorced. But so patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal, right? So there's a clan system here, and that directly affects who is responsible for redeeming. Redeeming is a concept, not just a word, in ancient Israelite culture. And it involves the person with the means to do so, who is the patriarch, having the responsibility to redeem lost family members. Genesis 15 is one of the most important chapters in the book of Genesis. Scholars are pretty clear about that. It is really where we see the origination of the covenantal promise being worked out in Abram's life that will be fleshed out in subsequent chapters and books. But Genesis 15 is surrounded by passages that talk about a family member getting into some kind of trouble or behaving weirdly and having to be rescued or redeemed. And so in this case, we're going to see Lot not really doing anything wrong, but gets caught up in a revolution that's happening and is kidnapped as a result. Well, when he is kidnapped, it becomes the responsibility, even though the Bedab, which is, remember, the ancient Hebrew word for family or clan, when the Bedab split, which it just did like in the last chapter or the chapter before, Lot leaves, he goes to build his own family near Sodom. Abram builds his own family. Lot chooses the better land. Abram ends up in the land of the promise. Even though that's happened, the two are still connected, and Abram is still responsible for Lot, meaning that if anything happens to Lot, it is Abram's responsibility to redeem him, hence the concept of redemption. The concept of redemption has literally absolutely nothing to do with asking for forgiveness or being sorry. Nothing whatsoever. The concept of redemption is totally related, 100%, to the one in power. It is an obligation of the one in power to redeem the lost. So, in this case, Lot has not done anything wrong. He gets kidnapped and cannot save himself, right? And so, because Abram is the patriarch, and because he's the patriarch, he has the means and the responsibility, it is incumbent upon Abram to redeem Lot. He has to do that. That's his role. If he doesn't do that, he's not fulfilling his duty as the patriarch of the Beidab. So he has to go get Lot, who cannot redeem himself. So when you see the biblical concept of redemption begin to work itself out, and then later be applied to salvation and the salvific process, one of the things that it's important to do is not confuse redemption with salvation itself or with forgiveness or repentance, right? Repentance, in many cases, well, in every case, is the responsibility of the lower-ranking party, right? The lower-ranking party is going to change direction and do something different. That is not redemption. Redemption is the responsibility of the higher-ranking party. Why does that matter? Because the entirety of the scriptural story is the story of God's great plan of redemption for all of creation being worked out by God. The concept and the way it's fleshed out and written about is meant to teach us that God knows and believes that it is God's responsibility to redeem humanity. God is the one working that out, which is why Paul is going to say that there will be a day when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. You hear me teach about this way, that while humans have free will and to a degree can exercise that free will, so does God. And one of the differences being, and there are many, that humans don't have the power to exercise their free will to the degree that God does. For instance, I can choose a few things, like I can choose what I'm going to say right now, but if I decided I wanted to make a unicorn appear out of nothing, I don't have the power to do that, right? God is the only being that has the power to affect God's free will in any capacity. So if God says there will be a day, then there will be a day. If God says there's going to be a day when I redeem all of creation, then there will be a day when all of creation is redeemed, right? God knowing and believing and trying to communicate to us through those stories that God believes and knows it is God's responsibility to redeem humanity, and God is doing that. God will do what God has said that God will do. That is the theme of Hebrews. And so we're going to see that fleshed out several ways. But this is the first real story of redemption in the biblical narrative, and it gives us an introduction to the concept, which we are then meant to later apply to God. And so there's, as the one who is redeemed, that means a couple of things. One is we can't do it ourselves. We can participate in God's act of redemption. You hear me say that a lot. What does that mean? God is working to redeem the world. We can participate in that. Pastor, what does that look like? I'm glad that you asked. In a congregation like ours, that may look like God pulling together a group of people who have a similar heart for a similar manner in which God is redeeming brokenness. And so we come together and fit into that one niche that God has carved out for us, and God blesses that in a loaves and fishes way to where we're saying, oh my gosh, how can we possibly feed more people and provide more clothing and sundry items? At which point God says, you can't. Let me connect you with Felicia down at Exchange Avenue Baptist Church. That is how we participate in what God, and we're doing several other things, that's just an example, but that is how we participate in what God is doing to redeem brokenness in the world. We're meant to connect those things. So as the one who is being redeemed, as the one who does not have the power to effect that, there are a couple of things I do. One is allow myself to be rescued, allow myself to be redeemed by God. So when God comes to me into my life and says, Matt, here are the things we're going to have to change in order for you to step into health and wholeness, which is what redemption is, then I trust and follow, or trust and obey, as the old hymn goes, and follow where God is leading. Part of that process may very well be get out there and start going into the homeless camps. Why, God? I've never thought about that before. I don't care. Do it anyway. It's part of your process of living into health and wholeness, right? When you are the one being redeemed, you follow the one doing the redeeming, because the one doing the redeeming has the resources to effect redemption. That's what we're supposed to catch, okay? So that's what's happening in the story about Lot. We'll get to the blessing of Elyon and, as we kind of get there. But let's go ahead and read through this. All right, chapter 14. These names are not only difficult to pronounce, and they are, but they also are not able, they can't be historically verified. So the first set of kings, and I believe there's 4 of them, scholars are not able to place them historically. Like they can locate the places, but the people they can't find historically at all, which is interesting because the next set of 5 kings they can. So as far as scholars are concerned, that doesn't mean that this episode didn't happen. And there are similarities between the names that are written here and some other ancient Sumerian pronunciations of other things, but sometimes those other names appear in different places in genealogical histories that don't match up with what's being said here. Scholars would, for obvious reasons, love to be able to place that historically to add validity. And it's kind of a weird thing that they can sort of place half of them, but not the other half. One of the things that's come up is maybe this is just a simple linguistic difference. Maybe these are kind of nicknames, but for whatever the case, they can't place them. So we have 4 kings, right, and then 5 kings. And you need to look at this like a suzerain and vassal kind of relationship. The 5 kings are going to rebel against the 4 kings and their tyranny. And so let's read through that. While Amraphel was king of Shinar, Elasar's king Arioch, Elam's king, this is pronounced Chedorlaomer. The CH there is a hard pronunciation, and it connects fairly closely to an ancient Sumerian word. The first part of that, Kero, is an ancient Sumerian word for king, and it's pronounced with a hard K. But the rest of that is a name, and it's not, nobody can find it. Chedorlaomer and Goim's king Tidal. They declared war on Sodom's king Bera, Gomorrah's king Birsha, Admah's king Shinab, Zeboim's king Shemeber, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. These latter kings formed an alliance in the Siddim Valley, that is the Dead Sea. For 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they revolted. So that's what you get. Because if you stopped too soon, you'd be like, this isn't a revolution. The 4 kings declared war. No, they declared war on the 5 kings because in the 13th year, the 5 kings revolted. They started a revolt. So the 4 kings, Chedorlaomer is the most powerful of them, and then has a coalition around him of vassals that stay with him. The other 5 vassals rebel against him, so his loyal vassals join him in declaring war on the rebels. Okay. What is this, verse 5? In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings of his alliance came and attacked the Rephaim. These are other names. In Ashtaroth, Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Sheveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the mountains of Seir, as far as El Paran near the desert. Then they turned back, came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked the territory of the Amalekites as well as the Amorites who lived in the Hazan Tamar. This illustrates a path, a journey, that is commonly called the King's Highway. And it is a road that Israel will later follow in the opposite direction that you're seeing it presented here when they're leaving Sinai. So it's a major route not only for trade, but for the movement of armies, because it's an easier route to traverse in very large groups through a difficult bit of terrain. Okay, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. The kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bera, that is Zor, they took up battle positions in the Siddim Valley against King Chedorlaomer, Elam, King Tidal of Goim, King Amraphel of Shinar, and King Arioch of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. You know, there had to be the person transcribing this had to be like, I'm just going to keep writing these names so people have to read them. That's what I'm going to do. Now, the Siddim Valley was filled with tar pits. When the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah retreated, they fell into them, and the rest fled into the mountains. So this is problematic because the king of Sodom is about to reappear, right? And so there's a part of you that's like, is this a soap opera? Like, what is, did he die but not really die and then he came back? No, the word fell here means, it's better translated to retreat or hide, but it's a common way in ancient Hebrew of saying kind of retreated and hid or laid low. So most likely they're laying low in the region of the tar pits. That's probably what's happening. But if you read through that and don't read it in the original language, it sounds like they fell into the tar pits and died and then came back later, at the end of the war, which is not what's happened. Most likely they're taking cover. One of the things when I was in reconnaissance team, we used to say that when we were looking for a place to bed down or get away in between missions or movements, we would try to find the most awful piece of land that we could possibly come across so that people wouldn't just happen to stumble upon us, right? So if you're retreating from a battle, you want to lay low for a little bit. Finding a terrible piece of land, in this case in the region of the tar pits, is not a bad place to lay low because you're protected more so than you are in different kinds of terrain. Most likely that's what's happening. So they fell into them, and the rest fled into the mountains. They took everything from Sodom and Gomorrah, including its food supplies, and left. So they've failed, right? The revolution has failed. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and everything he owned, and they took off. So part of what you should get out of this is there's a revolution, and the kings, the more powerful kings, the suzerain and his group of vassals, they were really powerful, and they were able to overcome this to the point that the rebels had to retreat. And as a part of that, Lot just gets caught in the crossfire. They're kind of looting the area that they have decimated, and they're taking Lot and all of his supplies and whatever they have, they're taking with them, okay? But you're meant to connect that this is a powerful group of people so that when Abram comes against them in a minute and is able to overcome them, that's a statement of how powerful Abram and his family or his Beidab have become, okay? So when a survivor arrived, unnamed survivor, he told Abram the Hebrew, who lived near the oaks of the Amorite Mamre, who was the brother of Eshcol and Aner, Abram's treaty partners. So here, Abram is called the Hebrew. And that'll come up again. But there's been a lot of debate about whether or not that word is meant to be connected to the Habiru. The Habiru, that word can also be pronounced Hapiru or Epiru, depending on which language you're saying it in. But closely in this language, Habiru sounds very much like Hebrew, which can be a dialectic difference. And that's been a question, right? The root word of that, Apiru, is very similar to Hebrew, which is the way that's spoken in this version of Hebraic Aramaic, right? So scholars are like, is this the same group of people where we're seeing a dialectic difference? Some people say, no, that's not the case. Linguists tend to say, yeah, that's absolutely probably what's happening here. Absolutely probably being a scholar's favorite two words to put together. Absolutely probably. How does that work? Well, let me bring my other heritage back into this. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, right? If you ask any of the speakers in our tribe how you say Cherokee in Cherokee, that is pronounced Chalagi. Be written or spelled Tsalagi, Chalagi. So I would say, for instance, if I wanted to say that I speak Cherokee, I would say Chalagi Gawoni or Chalagi Chinihiwi, right? The thing is that the way we say that, the way we say Cherokee, which is Chalagi, is an evolution of one dialect. There are originally three. My family actually came from part of the southern part of the Cherokee Nation on the border between Georgia and Alabama. There's a mountain that was actually called Scraper Mountain at the time. Our family name, my name is actually Disugatsky, and it gets translated badly to Scraper, which is where that comes from. But all of that is to say, the dialect where my family came from is different. It was the only dialect in the Cherokee Nation that had an R sound. And so in that dialect, what is pronounced, today we speak what is called the Western dialect. Back then it would have been the Northern dialect. The Cherokees in North Carolina have a slightly different dialect. For us, hello is OCO. For them, it's ACU. So it's similar but different. It's like speaking American and British English. In the lower area of the Cherokee Nation where my family is from, L's would have been pronounced as R's, and G's would have been pronounced as K's, which means that if you say Chalagi in the dialect that my family would have spoken, which is now extinct, it sounded like Cherokee, which is where the word Cherokee comes from. Cherokee, Anicherokee, Chinihui means the people of the sacred fire. Some people who don't speak the language have said that it means people of the cave lands, but it doesn't. It means people of sacred fire. So what is that to say? Just about every linguistic evolution involves that kind of thing. When you see a dialect change over time, you see substantial differences. Like, there would be no reason to connect L's and R's. Even if I were saying an L differently, an L would not naturally evolve into an R sound, right? A G could naturally evolve into a K sound. You could see that, right? But an L to an R is really not. The difference is you just have two very different dialects based on different cultural influences in those areas. For instance, the southern dialect that my family would have spoken was heavily influenced by the Creek language, or the Muskogee language. And so the scholars who study the evolution of language have all said, no, that's exactly probably what you're seeing here. You're seeing Habiru or Habiru pronounced as Hebrew, Abiru pronounced as Hebrew, depending on the linguistic differences involved. Why does that matter? Because there is a lot of history about the Habiru people, who also have a history in the Goshen region of Egypt, right? As a mercenary force that protected one of Egypt's borders. The evolution of this group of people that shows up throughout history, and they disappear, I have to look it up again, it's like in the 2nd millennia or the 3rd or 4th millennia BCE, I'd have to look it up, but they kind of disappear from the record at that point, at least in terms of that linguistic spelling, which again, you could say the same thing about the evolution of that language in my tribe. In the late 1700s, the R's and the K's go away entirely. We don't even have those sounds anymore. And so they're saying, most likely that's who this is. Well, if that's the case, then what you've got there from secular histories is the evolution of this tremendous mercenary fighting force over time that speaks volumes to the manner in which the Hebrew people are able to conquer in their conquest of the Promised Land, and why people were so afraid of them if they were that powerful a fighting force. Why does that matter? Because it would not be an uncommon thing for this to have been the moment in which that reference begins. These people, the Habiru, who come from Abram, his Beidab, are a powerful fighting force, right? We see that here. He's going to take 318 of his people and go after these super powerful kings so that he can get Lot back. And there's like no fanfare. Other than that it's a night attack, we don't know much about his tactics. He just overwhelms them and wins and gains a reputation that sticks with this people, okay? So Abram, let's go there. Verse 14, when Abram heard that his relative had been captured, he took all of the loyal men born in his household, 318, and went after them as far as Dan. 318 shows up like a lot over and over again. Some ancient Christians would try often to assign some kind of secret meaning to that word. It is possible that because numerology is a thing in the Bible, that there's some meaning behind the use of that word, but nobody really knows for sure what it is. So as you read about those kinds of things, I would just encourage you to take it with a grain of salt. Nobody's really figured out that it actually means something important, but it does show up a lot. They went after them as far as Dan. During the night, he and his servants divided themselves up against them, attacked and chased them to Hobah, north of Damascus. All right, so servants. If you read that, you're going to be like, why did he take all this? You get this like image of people who are mucking stalls, grabbing pitchforks and coming along, right? The word there that's used for that is mercenary. So he's got a trained mercenary fighting force, and he's taking them with him. So these are not people who were otherwise tending cattle and all of a sudden now have to fight. That is their purpose. That's what they do for him. And that's supposed to help us to understand that he has developed a pretty powerful force. His time in Egypt resulted in the development of a large militaristic force. Divided himself up against them, attacked, chased them to Hobah, north of Damascus. He brought back all of the looted property, together with his relative Lot, and Lot's property, wives, and people. So the only thing we get that is that he attacked during the night, and he overcame them, and he brought everything back. He got everything back, completely successful. This force that the group of 5 kings was not able to repel, Abram was with his people. So after he returned from his attack on Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, who had fallen into the tar pits, remember that? The king of Sodom came out to the Sheva Valley, which is the king's valley, to meet him, which is, again, along the king's highway. Now, Melchizedek, it's Melchi. Melchi means something to the effect of the great king. If you put Melchizedek together, it could mean the great king who has the Lord's favor, or it could mean the great king whose name was Izadek. And they're not sure which of those two things it is, and it's probably irrelevant. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and the priest of Elyon, had brought bread and wine, and he blesses him. Okay, Salem is Jerusalem. If nobody's connected that for you before, Salem is Jerusalem. That's actually I think it's Psalm 76 something, 76, let me see if I have it here. 76:3 is where that connection is made in the Bible. But Salem is Jerusalem. Jerusalem comes from the ancient, was it Sumerian word? Yeah. So Yeru or Yerusa comes from Uru in Sumerian, which means a city, large city of. The word Jerusalem is originally most likely a Sumerian word, meaning that that Jerusalem itself predates the entrance of any Hebraic people into that region. And here we have Melchizedek, who's king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, which will become Jerusalem. And he talks about El Elyon. Okay, so El Elyon is a strange name for a god. It can be translated to the God the Most High, but in Canaanite lore, which is where Melchizedek is coming from, El is one of the gods associated with the creation of things. There's a whole series of texts discovered, I don't remember how many years ago, that talk about El creating things. Elyon is the grandson of El, and so even in Canaanite lore, it's a little bit odd to put El Elyon together, although El Elyon could have been the full name of the grandson of El in Canaanite religion. Why does that matter? Well, you would expect a priest of that religion to bless Abram according to the tenets of his own religion. In a moment like that, you would think that would be normal, and it is. But verse 22 is where Abram is going to connect El Elyon to God. So let's get there, and then we'll talk about it. And he blessed him. So here's what he says. Bless Abram by El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. Bless El Elyon, who gave you the victory over your enemies. Rightly, they're giving God praise, right? Same kind of thing that you see Noah doing after the ark. Abram's going to praise God as well. Now the victory has come. They're giving God glory for the victory that's come. Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything. Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people and take the property for yourself. So they're in the process of dividing up spoils, right? But Abram is not going to take any more than is necessary to replenish the cost of the battle. And he's going to use, for what he says here, he's going to use an ancient Sumerian saying that means I'm not taking more than what I actually absolutely need. That's important because all of our representations of Abram post this issue with Sarai and Pharaoh show Abram behaving in essentially pretty honorable, wise ways, and his behavior before that is the same. That's going to give us pause to talk about some of the other events that are yet to occur that don't match up with what we believe culturally to be morally upright. So remember that, because that'll come up in a few chapters. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I promised the Lord, let me go back. Yeah, verse 22. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I promised, and this is it, the Lord, El Elyon. So Abram is connecting El Elyon to God. One of two things is happening here. Either you're seeing that the ancient Israelites, or at least Abram, has a heart for plurality that sometimes he's not credited with, i.e., that would be I respect your right to believe what you believe kind of approach. The other is that we can once again here be seeing a reappropriation of something. You're God, El Elyon is actually the God because there's only one God, right? So he's saying the Lord is this, my Lord is this. But in saying that, he's also saying your God and my God are the same God, right? There's one God. So there's an interesting theology that comes out of his connection of those two things. Creator of heaven and earth, that I wouldn't take even a thread or a sandal strap from anything that was yours so that you couldn't say, I'm the one who made Abram rich. A thread or a sandal strap is an ancient Sumerian saying. I'm not even going to take a thread or a sandal strap. There's like two other versions of that. Essentially means I'm not going to take any more than is absolutely necessary or owed to me. So he's not going to take any more than necessary, so that he can't say, I'm the one who made Abram rich. Interesting, because he got really wealthy off of Pharaoh. Here he's not taking any more than is necessary. So why did he take what he took from Pharaoh? That's a good question. Most likely to begin to build the Beidab that he was responsible for. But he has what he needs for his Beidab. So what you're seeing here is he's trying to provide, that he's not greedy. He's building what he needs to build to provide. And he's doing the things that need to be done, like rescuing Lot, who was kidnapped. He's fulfilling his responsibility, but he's not being greedy. He's not just seeking more wealth and riches. The only exception is that that's 24. The only exception is that the young men may keep whatever they have taken to eat, and the men who went with me, Aner, Ashel, and Mamre, may keep their share. And that pulls us through the end of that chapter. So we have some representations of Abram. He's an upright guy. That's what we're supposed to be getting out of this. He's not greedy. He's going to take care of his family. But beyond what is necessary to take care of his family, it is not greed that motivates him. It is his obligation to the people that he is responsible for. And we're meant to see that as stewardship. He is stewarding what he has been given by God, which in this case also involves the relationships and the people that God has given him and given him, according to the theology of the Old Testament, charge over. So he's going to make sure he has what he needs to do that, but he's not going to just try to amass wealth for the sake of being greedy. We also get the biblical concept of redemption out of this and a little bit of understanding of some events that are going to set the stage for what will come. It is a difficult chapter to read, and it's one I think that is really often overlooked. There's some historic significance to it in terms of kind of validating some of what history says about this era and this people, and that's helpful. But it also lays a framework for what is coming and ushers us into the next chapter. So we'll be here next Thursday. I'll be here next Thursday. We're going to study Genesis 15. I use this as a reference when I preach pretty often because there's a lot in Genesis 15 that directly connects to our salvation or salvific theology as Christians that we miss. So if you have heard me preach through the covenantal obligations and stipulations, I'm going to talk about that next week because that is where it happens, which should, I hope, the more you hear that, help you to better understand kind of how the new covenant that Christ inaugurates is set up. So next week, we'll be in Genesis 15, but we're also going to spend a little bit of time in Luke so that we can see the parallels there between what God is doing with Abram and what Christ is doing in the Last Supper. We have a little time, so do you have any questions or thoughts? I'd love to answer them, but I think I told you everything I know just now. That's probably not true. Not an incredibly exciting chapter, but one that is supposed to set the stage for not only our understanding of Abram and the Abrahamic story. And interestingly, a lot of scholars think that this chapter was added sometime around the 7th or 9th century BC. They don't think that it was original. There's no way, I think, probably for them to prove that, but the writing style is different. It's an odd introduction. So most scholars think that this is a later addition, probably from an oral story tradition that developed about this episode with Abram and Lot that somebody then added to the story of Abram's life. But most are in agreement that this particular chapter is not original to the writing of it. But it's important in that it gives us an understanding of a concept of redemption that sometimes we confuse with other things. All right, so let me pray for you, and we'll go on with the rest of our days. God, we're grateful for today and for the opportunity to study and learn. We're grateful to be able to learn more about who you are by learning more about what you've done and the people that you have been at work in and through. We pray, God, that you would continue to work in and through us, that you would give us the courage to follow where you lead as you seek to redeem us as individuals and as a community, because we do not have the strength and we do not have the resources to redeem ourselves. We're grateful for the work that you're doing to accomplish that. Help us to be sensitive to it and willing to follow. This we ask in your name. Amen. Thank you for coming.